At my late wife's reading, my son-in-law smirked and announced, "Every beach house belongs to us now. The old man gets absolutely nothing." He was so confident that his entire family burst into laughter. I looked him straight in the eyes, smiled, and quietly said, "You're celebrating far too early." Within minutes, the room fell into a silence none of them were prepared for. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching this story from. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you enjoy realistic family revenge stories with unexpected twists, don't forget to support the channel so you never miss another one. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my life, I believe that character reveals itself during difficult moments, not during celebrations. I live in a peaceful coastal town in South Carolina, where the mornings smell of salt water, and every sunrise reminds me that life keeps moving no matter how much pain we carry. For nearly 43 years, my wife Evelyn was my best friend. She wasn't just my partner. She was a reason every house felt like home. She had this quiet strength about her. Whenever life became complicated, she never panicked. Instead, she'd sit down with a cup of tea, think carefully, and somehow find a solution that everyone else had overlooked. That's one of the many reasons I fell in love with her. Unfortunately, life doesn't ask for permission before changing everything. 2 months before her passing, the doctors told us there wasn't much more they could do. Even then, Evelyn spent more time worrying about me than herself. One evening, while we sat on our back porch watching the waves roll toward the shore, she suddenly asked, "Harold, promise me something." I looked at her and smiled. "Anything." She reached for my hand. "When I'm gone, don't ignore what people become after money enters the conversation." At the time, I thought grief was making her imagine problems that didn't exist. I couldn't have been more wrong. Our daughter, Laura, had married Ryan Carter almost 10 years earlier. When Ryan first joined our family, he appeared respectful. He dressed well. He spoke politely. He always brought expensive wine to dinner and complimented everyone around the table. Most people admired him instantly. I didn't. There was something about him that never felt genuine. He smiled too often. He agreed too quickly. And every compliment sounded rehearsed. Still, Laura loved him. That was enough for me. I chose to believe I was simply being an overprotective father. For several years, everything seemed normal. We celebrated birthdays together, shared Sunday dinners, spent holidays at our beach house. Ryan always acted like the perfect son-in-law, at least while Evelyn was healthy. Then something changed. The day doctors confirmed Evelyn's illness, Ryan became interested, not in her recovery, in our assets. It started with innocent questions. "Harold, have you ever thought about simplifying your investments?" Another week he'd ask, "Managing several beachfront properties at your age must be exhausting." Sometimes he'd casually mention estate planning over dinner. Other times he'd suggest meeting financial advisors he conveniently happened to know. At first, I appreciated his concern. Then I realized every conversation somehow returned to the same topic: property, money, inheritance. One afternoon, while Evelyn was resting upstairs, Ryan walked beside me through the backyard. "You know," he said casually, "people your age deserve peace. You shouldn't have to deal with all these houses anymore." I looked at him. "Maybe," he smiled, "if everything were transferred early, life would be much easier for everyone." Everyone. Interesting choice of words. Not you, not Evelyn. Everyone. That conversation stayed in my mind much longer than I admitted. As Evelyn's condition became worse, Ryan's confidence grew stronger. He started speaking as if our future decisions already belonged to him. Even Laura slowly changed. She never demanded anything, but she stopped defending me whenever Ryan made comments about my age. If he joked that I was old-fashioned, she laughed. If he interrupted me during conversations, she stayed silent. That silence hurt more than the words themselves. Then came Evelyn's final week. She asked to speak with me alone. She looked tired, but her eyes were as calm as ever. "Harold." "Yes." "Promise me one last thing." "Of course. Whatever happens after I'm gone, don't let guilt force you into making foolish decisions." I squeezed her hand. "You have my word." She smiled. It was the last real smile I ever saw. 3 days later, the love of my life was gone. The house suddenly became unbearably quiet. Every chair reminded me of her. Every photograph felt heavier than before. Even making coffee for one person seemed wrong. For 2 weeks, I barely left the house. Friends visited. Neighbors brought food. Laura called occasionally. Ryan never once asked how I was coping. Instead, he kept asking when the lawyer had scheduled the reading of Evelyn's will. That told me everything I needed to know. Finally, the appointment arrived. I drove myself downtown early that morning. The law office occupied the top floor of a modern glass building overlooking the harbor. As I stepped inside the conference room, Ryan was already there. Perfect suit, expensive watch, confident smile. Laura sat beside him, avoiding eye contact. Ryan's mother, Diane, stood quietly near the window with folded arms, studying every document on the table before anyone had even spoken. The lawyer greeted everyone professionally before opening a thick folder. The room became completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Ryan leaned back comfortably in his chair. He looked less like a grieving family member and more like a man waiting to collect a prize. I simply folded my hands together and waited, because unlike everyone else in that room, I already knew something they didn't. The lawyer adjusted her glasses, opened the folder, and began reading the formal legal introduction. Every word echoed through the quiet conference room. No one interrupted, at least not for the first minute. Then Ryan leaned forward with a confident grin. "Mrs. Collins," he said, tapping the table with his finger, "we all know why we're here. Let's skip the legal language and get to the important part." The lawyer looked at him without changing her expression. "Mr. Carter, I'm required to read the document exactly as it was written." Ryan shrugged. "Fair enough." He leaned back again, crossing one leg over the other like a man sitting in his own office. Laura remained silent. She hadn't looked at me once since I entered the room. I wasn't sure whether it was guilt or embarrassment, perhaps both. The lawyer continued reading Evelyn's final wishes, thanking friends, donating to several charities she had quietly supported for years, and leaving personal keepsakes to different family members. Ryan checked his watch twice. His mother sighed impatiently. Neither of them cared about Evelyn's final words. They were waiting for one thing: the properties. Finally, the lawyer reached the final section: the remaining real estate assets. Ryan straightened in his chair. Laura slowly looked up. Even Diane stepped closer to the table. "According to this document," she paused briefly. Ryan smiled before she had even finished. "The 7 beachfront properties shall pass to my daughter, Laura Bennett Carter." Ryan couldn't help himself. He laughed, a loud, victorious laugh. "I knew it," he shouted. Before the lawyer could continue reading, Ryan stood and clapped his hands together. "Looks like everything worked out exactly the way it should." His mother laughed with him. "Congratulations, sweetheart." Ryan looked directly at me. "Well, Harold, I guess retirement just became a lot more peaceful for you." The sarcasm wasn't subtle. He wanted everyone in the room to see him winning. I simply folded my hands. The lawyer hadn't finished reading. "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "please sit down." Ryan frowned. "Is there something else?" "Yes." She reached toward another cream-colored folder resting beneath the will. One I had noticed the moment I walked into the room. Ryan hadn't. Neither had Diane. Laura looked confused. "What's that?" Ryan asked. The lawyer placed the folder carefully on the table. "This document is legally attached to Mrs. Bennett's estate planning records." Ryan's confident smile faded just slightly. "I've never seen that before." "No," I replied calmly. "You haven't?" The room became quiet. Ryan looked from me to the lawyer. "What exactly is it?" Before answering, the lawyer opened the folder and removed several notarized documents. Each page carried official seals. Each signature had been witnessed years earlier. She carefully arranged them across the table. 3 years before Mrs. Bennett's passing, she explained, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett established a private family trust. Ryan blinked. "A what?" Every one of the beachfront properties was transferred into that trust long before this will was ever written. Silence. Absolute silence. Ryan stared at the documents as though they were written in another language. That's impossible. The lawyer shook her head. No, Mr. Carter. It's fully legal. Laura slowly picked up one of the copies. Her hands were trembling. Dad, she whispered. I finally looked at her. Your mother believed planning ahead was better than leaving problems behind. Ryan grabbed another document. He read the first page, then the second, then went back to the first again. His confidence disappeared with every line. There has to be some mistake. There isn't, the lawyer replied. These properties are owned by the Bennett Family Trust. They are not controlled by the will and cannot be distributed through probate. Ryan looked at me. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he looked nervous. You knew about this? Of course. Why didn't anyone tell us? I smiled politely. Because it wasn't your business. Diane suddenly stepped forward. I want another attorney to review these papers. The lawyer nodded. You're welcome to hire anyone you'd like. These documents could have been created recently. Without saying a word, the lawyer produced the original registration records. Certified, time-stamped, officially recorded 3 years earlier. Diane's face lost its color. Ryan slammed both hands on the table. No, this changes everything. Exactly, I answered quietly. Ryan pointed at me. You planned this. I stood slowly. No, Ryan, your greed planned this. Nobody spoke. The confidence that filled the room only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. Ryan hurried after me as I walked toward the hallway. Harold, I stopped but didn't turn around. We're not finished. I think we are. You can't keep all those properties. Watch me. His voice became colder. We'll challenge that trust in court. I finally turned to face him. You're free to try. And when we win... I interrupted him. You should be very careful about confusing confidence with evidence. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the elevator doors opened behind me. I stepped inside. As the doors slowly closed, I watched Ryan pull out his phone before I even reached the ground floor. He wasn't calling Laura. He wasn't calling family. He was calling a lawyer. That single phone call told me one thing. Ryan wasn't ready to accept defeat. He was preparing for war. If you're enjoying the story so far and want to support the channel, leaving a quick comment or subscribing is a great way to help. Also, tell me which country you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach around the world. The courtroom battle hadn't even started, yet Ryan was already acting as if victory was only a matter of time. 3 days after Will reading, I received an email from my attorney, Margaret Collins. Harold, Ryan Carter has officially filed a petition challenging the validity of the Bennett Family Trust. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had been expecting it. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, walked onto my back porch, and watched the waves crash against the shoreline. Evelyn used to tell me something. The people who chase money the hardest usually panic the fastest when they can't reach it. Her words echoed in my mind. She had seen Ryan's true character long before I did. An hour later, I drove to Margaret's office. She already had the lawsuit spread across the conference table. It was thick, over 40 pages. Ryan's attorney claimed Evelyn had been emotionally vulnerable when she signed the trust. They suggested she had been manipulated, that she hadn't fully understood what she was signing. Margaret finished reading and calmly closed the folder. Legally, I asked. She smiled. It's weak. How weak? Weak enough that they don't actually have evidence. She pointed towards several highlighted paragraphs. They're hoping to force a long court battle. Most people your age eventually settle because they grow tired of legal expenses. I nodded slowly. But I'm not most people. She smiled again. That's exactly what I told them. Before leaving her office, I gave her only one instruction. Don't offer them a single dollar. Not even to avoid court? Especially not to avoid court. The following morning, life returned to its usual routine, at least on the surface. I opened Harbor Point Marina, the small marina Evelyn and I had built together almost 15 years earlier. Most mornings began the same way. Fresh coffee, the smell of seawater, the sound of boats gently tapping against the docks. Working with my hands always helped me think. That morning, I continued restoring an old wooden sailboat that had been sitting in my workshop for months. As I sanded one of the weathered boards, my phone buzzed. Laura. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. Dad. Her voice sounded nervous. Can we talk? Of course. There was a long silence. Ryan says the trust isn't valid. Ryan also says a lot of things. She sighed. He believes the court will overturn it. Does he? Yes. I kept sanding the wood. Then I hope he's prepared to be disappointed. Another silence. Dad. Couldn't we just work something out? I finally stopped working. What exactly does work something out mean? Maybe you could give Ryan one of the beach houses. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded exactly like something Ryan would have told her to say. Laura. Yes. If someone tried to take away everything you built with your own hands, would you hand it over just to keep the peace? She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Take care of yourself, I said gently before ending the call. A week later, Margaret invited me back to her office. This time, she wasn't alone. Another attorney sat beside her. His name was Victor Hayes, a specialist in financial investigations. After introducing himself, he slid a thin folder across the table. Before we discussed strategy, he said, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. Has Ryan ever talked to you about his real estate business? Only enough to brag about it. Victor exchanged a quick glance with Margaret. Interesting. Why? He folded his hands together. Because while reviewing public records connected to this lawsuit, we noticed something unusual. My attention sharpened immediately. What kind of unusual? Nothing illegal that we can prove, yet. He emphasized the last word. But several financial transactions connected to Ryan's business don't seem to follow normal industry practices. I leaned back in my chair. Are you telling me he's hiding something? Victor answered carefully. I'm saying successful people rarely panic over losing an inheritance unless they have a reason to desperately need the money. That sentence stayed with me. Ryan wasn't simply greedy. He was desperate, and desperate people often make careless mistakes. Can you investigate further? I asked. Victor nodded. Legally, quietly, and thoroughly. That's exactly how we operate. I signed the investigation agreement without hesitation. As I walked back to my truck, I couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why did Ryan need those properties so badly? It wasn't just ambition anymore. It felt like survival. 2 evenings later, I noticed something strange. A black SUV had been parked across the street from my house for nearly 40 minutes. The engine wasn't running. The lights were off. Whoever was inside wasn't visiting anyone. They were watching. I stood behind the living room curtains without making a sound. A few minutes later, the driver's door opened. The person stepped out just long enough for the porch light to catch his face. I recognized him immediately. It wasn't Ryan. It was someone much younger. Someone I had seen at family gatherings years ago. Ryan's nephew, Ethan. He looked toward my house one last time before getting back into the SUV. Seconds later, the vehicle disappeared into the night. I quietly locked my front door. Then I picked up my phone. Not to call the police. To call Margaret. Something told me this lawsuit was about to become much more personal. The moment I hung up with Margaret, I knew one thing for certain. Ryan wasn't relying on the courtroom alone anymore. Someone had been watching my house. Maybe it was intimidation. Maybe curiosity. Either way, it wasn't a coincidence. The next morning, I arrived at Harbor Point Marina before sunrise. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the first orange rays of daylight. Normally, mornings have brought me peace. That day, something felt different. As I unlocked the workshop, I noticed fresh tire tracks near the storage building. Heavy ones, not from any of our customers. I walked around the property, checking everything carefully. Nothing appeared to be missing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there during the night. About 20 minutes later, my dock manager, Ben, pulled into the parking lot. The moment he stepped out of his truck, he frowned. "Morning, Harold." "Morning. You look like you didn't sleep." "Someone was outside my house last night. His expression changed instantly. "Did you call the police?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I don't have proof they committed a crime." Ben nodded slowly. He had worked with me for nearly 12 years. He knew I never rushed to conclusions. "Want me to check the security cameras?" "Please." Within minutes, we were sitting inside the office reviewing footage from the previous night. Camera 1, nothing unusual. Camera 2, empty parking lot. Camera 3, at exactly 2:17 a.m. A pickup truck slowly entered the marina. Its headlights remained off until the very last second. The driver never got out. Instead, the truck rolled slowly past the workshop before stopping near the fuel dock. Whoever was inside stayed there for nearly 3 minutes. Then the vehicle quietly drove away. Ben leaned closer to the screen. "Can you zoom in?" I enlarged the image. Unfortunately, the license plate wasn't clear enough, but something else caught my attention. A large scratch ran across the driver's side door. It wasn't much, but details matter, especially small ones. Save every recording. I told Ben, already doing it. I copied the footage onto 2 separate flash drives before locking one inside my office safe. Experience had taught me something important. Evidence has a strange way of disappearing when people become desperate. Later that afternoon, Margaret called. "Harold, I received another filing from Ryan's attorney." "What now?" "They're requesting access to several financial records connected to your properties." "On what grounds?" "They claim the trust was created to unfairly prevent rightful inheritance." I laughed quietly. "That's creative. Not creative enough to work." "Good. But..." There was a pause. "They're becoming much more aggressive." "Meaning?" "They're hoping to pressure you into settling before the court reaches a decision." I looked through the office window toward the marina. The boats gently rocked with the tide. Ryan had no idea how patient I could be. "Tell them we're not negotiating." "That's what I expected you'd say." 3 days later, Victor Hayes called. "Harold, I found something." His voice sounded unusually serious. "Can you come by my office?" An hour later, I was sitting across from him. A thick folder rested on his desk. He slid it toward me. "I've spent the last several days reviewing Ryan's business history. And his company isn't nearly as successful as he wants people to believe." That didn't surprise me. "Go on." Victor opened the folder. Several investment properties he claimed to own were actually financed almost entirely with debt. He pointed toward another document. "Some of those loans are already behind schedule." "How far behind?" "Enough to concern the lenders." I folded my arms. "So he's running out of money?" Victor nodded. "Much faster than anyone realizes." "Is that why he's after the beach houses?" "I believe so." He handed me another page. If he controlled those properties, he could refinance them and solve most of his financial problems overnight. Everything suddenly made sense. This had never been about family. Never about Evelyn. Never about fairness. Ryan wasn't fighting because he felt entitled. He was fighting because he was drowning. And he thought my family's legacy was a life raft that would save him. Victor closed the folder. "There's something else." "What is it?" "One of Ryan's business partners resigned 6 months ago." "Why?" "Nobody knows." "Can you find out?" Victor smiled. "I'm already working on it." That evening, I drove home just before sunset. As I turned onto my street, I noticed the same black SUV parked 2 houses away. This time, it didn't drive away. The driver stepped out. It was Ethan again. He looked nervous, almost frightened. Instead of walking toward my house, he stood beside the SUV for several seconds before finally speaking. "Mr. Bennett." I remained where I was. "Yes." He looked over his shoulder as if making sure nobody had followed him. Then he lowered his voice. "You need to be careful." "Why?" His eyes met mine for only a second. "Because Uncle Ryan isn't planning to lose." Before I could ask another question, he hurried back into the SUV and drove away without another word. I stood there watching the taillights disappear into the distance. Ryan had already lost in court. He was losing financially. And now, even members of his own family seemed afraid of what he might do next. By the way, I'd love to know where you're watching this story from. Leave your city or country in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Ethan's warning stayed in my mind long after he disappeared down the street. You need to be careful. He hadn't sounded angry. He hadn't sounded threatening. He had sounded afraid. That was what bothered me the most. The following morning, I called Victor Hayes before leaving for the marina. I need another favor. What's happened? Ryan's nephew came to my house last night. Victor was silent for a moment. Did he threaten you? No. Then why are you concerned? Because people don't secretly warn someone unless they know something bad is about to happen. I'll look into it, Victor replied. Quietly. That's all I asked. 3 days passed without incident. Or at least, that's what I thought. Thursday morning, I arrived at Harbor Point Marina just after 7. The parking lot looked normal. The docks looked normal. Even the workshop seemed exactly as I'd left it. Then I noticed shattered glass covering the entrance. I stopped walking. The large front window of my workshop had been smashed. Pieces of glass were scattered across the concrete floor. Red spray paint covered one side of the building. 3 enormous words stretched across the wall. Give up now. For several seconds, I simply stared. Not because I was frightened, because I realized Ryan had finally crossed a line. Ben came running from the docks. Harold, I already called the police. I nodded. Good. Unlike Ryan, I believed in evidence, not assumptions. 20 minutes later, Officer Melissa Grant arrived. She photographed every inch of the damage before asking the obvious question. Any idea who might want to do this? I thought carefully before answering. Several people are unhappy with me right now. Can you be more specific? There's an ongoing civil lawsuit involving family property. She wrote several notes on her clipboard. Any security cameras? 4. Perfect. Ben, and I led her into the office. Camera 1 showed the parking lot. Camera 2 overlooked the workshop. Camera 3 covered the fuel dock. Camera 4 faced the entrance road. At exactly 2:11 a.m., a hooded figure stepped out of a dark pickup truck. The person carried a tire iron. One swing, the front window exploded. A second later, the spray paint appeared. The entire attack lasted less than 90 seconds. Before leaving, the person looked directly toward camera 2. Although the hood covered most of the face, one detail remained perfectly visible. A dragon tattoo wrapping around the left side of the neck. Officer Grant paused the footage. Can you zoom in? I enlarged the image. Ben immediately pointed at the screen. I've seen that tattoo before. Where? I asked Ryan's nephew, Ethan. Officer Grant looked at both of us. Are you certain? Ben nodded. He came here last summer, wearing a t-shirt. Same tattoo. The officer copied the footage before standing. We'll investigate immediately. After she left, I made 2 additional backups of every video file. One stayed in my office safe. The other went directly to Margaret. If there was one thing life had taught me, it was never to trust a single copy of important evidence. That afternoon, Victor called. Harold, I think I know why Ethan warned you. Go on. Ryan is under enormous financial pressure. How enormous? Victor took a deep breath. 3 banks have already contacted his company regarding overdue commercial loans. That's bad. It gets worse. I'm listening. One of his largest development projects completely collapsed 6 months ago. How much did he lose? Several $1,000,000. I slowly leaned back in my chair. Everything was finally starting to fit together. Ryan hadn't been chasing my properties because he wanted luxury. He needed cash. Fast. Without those beach houses, his entire business empire was beginning to collapse. Victor continued. There's another interesting detail. What is it? Several investors are demanding repayment. Meaning, if Ryan loses this lawsuit, he'll probably lose everything else too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Victor quietly added, desperate people don't usually make rational decisions. That evening, Margaret invited me to her office. When I arrived, another thick envelope was waiting on the conference table. Ryan's attorney sent this today. Another lawsuit? No. Then what? She slid the letter toward me. I opened it. It was a settlement proposal. Ryan offered to withdraw the entire case if I voluntarily transferred 2 beachfront homes into Laura's name. I couldn't help smiling. Margaret noticed. What's funny? He's pretending this is a compromise. Exactly. It's desperation disguised as negotiation. She nodded. Would you like me to reject it? Not yet. Margaret looked surprised. You want to think about it? No. I closed the folder. I want Ryan to believe I'm thinking about it. A slow smile crossed her face. You're buying time. Exactly. For Victor? Yes. Because something inside me kept whispering the same thought. Ryan wasn't hiding just one secret. There was something much bigger beneath the surface, and I intended to find it before making my next move. If this story has kept you hooked so far, consider showing your support with a like. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Harold's position, would you accept Ryan's offer or keep fighting until the truth came out? I left Margaret's office without giving Ryan an answer. That was intentional. People like Ryan hated silence. The longer he waited, the more pressure he would feel. For the next several days, I acted as if nothing had happened. I opened Harbor Point Marina every morning, worked on the old sailboat, shared coffee with Ben, smiled at customers. Anyone watching me would have believed I had forgotten about the lawsuit. But behind the scenes, Victor Hayes was working harder than ever. 5 days later, my phone rang just after 8 in the morning. It was Victor. His voice sounded calmer than usual. That alone told me he had found something important. Harold, I've got it. Got what? The reason Ryan is so desperate. Can you meet me? I'm already on my way. When I arrived at Victor's office, he closed the blinds before speaking. That immediately caught my attention. He placed a thick folder on the desk. This one was much larger than the previous reports. Everything inside this folder comes from public records, corporate filings, and legally obtained financial documents, he explained. Nothing illegal? Not on our side. He opened the first page. Ryan has been secretly moving money through a consulting company called Horizon Property Advisors. I've never heard of it. Most people haven't. Victor slid another document across the desk. Because it barely exists. The company had no employees, no public office, no active website. Yet, over the last 4 years, more than $400,000 had passed through its accounts. I frowned. Where did the money come from? Clients. Where did it go? Victor turned another page. Several different accounts before eventually ending up in an offshore bank. I stared at him. You're saying Ryan has been hiding money? That's exactly what I'm saying. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, can this be proven? Victor smiled slightly. Every wire transfer leaves a trail. He tapped the folder. And this trail is surprisingly clean. The next hour felt unreal. Victor carefully explained every document, every transaction, every company. Ryan had created fake consulting fees that quietly redirected money away from legitimate business deals. The amounts were always small enough to avoid attracting attention. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 10,000 somewhere else. Individually, they look harmless. Together, they totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. How long has he been doing this? I asked. At least 4 years. Does anyone else know? Not yet. What happens if the authorities find out? Victor leaned back. Best case scenario? He loses his real estate license. Worst case, criminal fraud investigation. I slowly closed the folder. Everything Ryan had built could disappear overnight. That afternoon, I met Margaret again. She read every page carefully. When she finished, she removed her glasses. This changes everything. Can we use it? Yes. Immediately? She shook her head. No. Why not? Timing matters. She folded her hands. If we reveal this today, Ryan's attorney will argue you're retaliating because of the lawsuit. And if we wait, then it becomes evidence of his character after he has already pushed this case too far. I nodded. That made sense. Margaret looked directly at me. Harold, yes. What do you actually want? It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't. After a long pause, I finally spoke. I don't want revenge. Then what? I want Ryan to stop believing he can bully people into giving him what he wants. Margaret smiled. That's a much stronger reason. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Laura called again. This time, she wasn't reading from one of Ryan's scripts. Her voice sounded exhausted. Dad, can we meet? Of course. We agreed to have lunch at a small cafe near the marina. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. The confident woman I had raised looked completely drained. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I owe you an apology." I remained silent. I should have listened to Mom. She tried to warn me. I looked at her carefully. About Ryan? She nodded. Tears slowly filled her eyes. She told me years ago that he cared too much about money. I thought she was just being protective. She wiped her face. I was wrong. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. It's never too late to admit a mistake. She looked at me. Dad, yes. Is Ryan hiding something? That question surprised me. Why would you ask that? She hesitated. Because for the past month, he's been receiving phone calls late at night. Every time the phone rings, he leaves the room. Yesterday, she stopped speaking for a moment. Yesterday, I heard him tell someone, "If I don't get those beach houses soon, we're finished." A heavy silence settled between us. So, even Laura didn't know the full truth. She only knew her husband was terrified. I looked out the cafe window toward the ocean. Ryan believed those properties would save his future. He had no idea. The evidence sitting inside Victor's folder had already sealed it. If you've been enjoying this story, thank you for being part of the journey. Your support means a lot. And I'd love to know, what would you do if you discovered someone in your own family had been hiding a secret like this? Share your thoughts below. After meeting Laura, I drove back to Harbor Point Marina with one thought repeating in my mind. Ryan wasn't fighting because he believed he deserved the properties. He was fighting because he believed they were the only thing standing between him and complete financial ruin. The difference mattered. A greedy man can be negotiated with. A desperate man will risk everything. The following Monday, Margaret called just after sunrise. "Harold, we have a court hearing tomorrow. Anything unexpected?" Ryan's attorney has submitted additional documents. Do they have anything new? Not really. Then why the hearing? They're hoping the judge will pressure both sides into mediation. I smiled. Good luck with that. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Ryan sat at the opposite table, wearing an expensive navy blue suit. From a distance, he looked calm, but I'd known him long enough to recognize the small signs. His leg bounced beneath the table. He kept checking his phone. His attorney whispered to him several times. Something wasn't going according to plan. Judge Rebecca Lawson entered the courtroom, reviewed both files, and immediately began asking questions. Ryan's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, this dispute has gone on long enough. My client simply believes the trust deserves further examination." The judge looked over her glasses. "Do you have any new evidence?" A brief silence filled the courtroom. "Not at this time." "Any new witnesses?" "No, Your Honor." "Any expert testimony challenging the trust?" "Not yet." The judge slowly closed the folder. "Then why are we here?" Ryan's attorney hesitated. "We were hoping both parties could reach a fair settlement." The judge turned toward Margaret. "Mr. Bennett?" Margaret stood confidently. "My client has no interest in negotiating over property that legally belongs to him. The trust was properly established years before Mrs. Bennett's passing. Every required legal document has already been submitted." The judge nodded. "That's consistent with my review." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time, the confidence he had shown during the will reading was completely gone. The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. Before leaving the courtroom, Judge Lawson looked directly at Ryan. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor?" "Unless your legal team presents compelling new evidence, I strongly suggest you reconsider continuing this case. The court will not entertain speculation indefinitely. Ryan forced a smile. Understood. But I could tell he didn't understand at all. Outside the courthouse, Ryan approached me before I reached my truck. Harold. I stopped walking. Yes. You think you've already won? No. Then why are you smiling? Because I've stopped worrying. His jaw tightened. This isn't over. Maybe not. You'll regret refusing my settlement. I looked him directly in the eyes. You should spend less time worrying about me, and more time worrying about your own future. For a brief second, something flashed across his face. Fear. It disappeared almost instantly, but I saw it, and once you recognize genuine fear, you never mistake it for anything else. The next morning, Victor arrived at the marina carrying another folder. He didn't even sit down. It's happening. What is? One of Ryan's former business partners contacted me. That surprised me. Voluntarily? Victor nodded. He resigned almost a year ago. Why? Because he suspected money was disappearing from company accounts. Did he have proof? Not then. Does he now? Victor slowly placed a flash drive on my desk, enough to support everything we've already found. I stared at the small black drive. It looked insignificant, but it might have contained the final piece of the puzzle. What's on it? Emails, bank statements, internal accounting records, and conversations between Ryan and the shell company's accountant. I looked back at Victor. Is it authentic? We've already verified the metadata. Every document checks out. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Victor quietly said, Harold. Yes. Ryan doesn't know this witness came forward. I nodded. Let's keep it that way. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch watching the sun disappear beneath the horizon. The ocean looked peaceful, exactly as it had the day Evelyn and I promised protect everything we had built together. I thought about our first tiny apartment, the years we struggled to pay our mortgage, the weekends we spent repairing old rental properties ourselves because we couldn't afford contractors. None of it had been easy. Every dollar had been earned honestly. Every property represented years of sacrifice. Ryan had looked at those homes and seen wealth. I looked at them and saw memories. That's why I couldn't surrender them. Not because of money, because they represented a lifetime that Evelyn and I had built together. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Margaret. Ryan's attorney requested an urgent meeting tomorrow morning. I read it twice before placing the phone back on the table. For the first time since this battle began, Ryan wasn't demanding. He was requesting. That alone told me something had changed. And whatever happened in that meeting, I had a feeling it would decide how this story finally ended. The next morning, I arrived at Margaret's office 10 minutes early. She was already waiting. A fresh pot of coffee sat on the conference table, but neither of us touched it. Ryan's attorney will be here any minute, she said. I nodded. Outside the large office windows, rain slowly rolled across the harbor. It felt like the kind of morning when something important was about to end. Exactly 9 o'clock, the conference room door opened. Ryan walked in beside his attorney. For the first time since this entire battle had started, he didn't look confident. His expensive suit was still perfectly pressed. His shoes still shined. But appearances couldn't hide exhaustion. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. His shoulders slumped. Even his handshake lacked confidence. He avoided looking directly at me. His attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett. My client would like to resolve this matter today. Margaret folded her hands. We're listening. The attorney slid a single document across the table. Ryan Carter agrees to withdraw the lawsuit permanently and without conditions. I didn't reach for the paper. Instead, I looked at Ryan. What changed? He stayed silent. His attorney answered instead. My client believes continuing this litigation is no longer in anyone's best interest. I smiled slightly. That's a very different opinion from the one you had last month. Ryan finally spoke. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I made mistakes. Those 4 words surprised everyone in the room, including Margaret. Did you? I asked calmly. Ryan lowered his eyes. Yes, more than I wanted to admit. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Margaret placed another folder onto the table. Ryan recognized it immediately. His face lost what little color remained. He knew exactly what was inside. The financial investigation, the offshore transfers, the shell company, every secret he had tried to hide. Margaret didn't open the folder. She simply rested her hand on top of it. Our agreement remains exactly as discussed, she said. Withdraw the lawsuit completely. And these documents remain locked away. Ryan slowly nodded. I understand. His attorney handed over the final paperwork. Margaret reviewed every page carefully. Then she looked at me. Everything is in order. Without hesitation, I signed. Ryan signed immediately afterward. Just like that, months of legal battles were over. 2 weeks later, the court officially dismissed the case with prejudice. That meant Ryan could never file the same lawsuit again. The Bennett family trust remained exactly as Evelyn and I had designed it years before. Every beachfront property stayed protected. Every decision remained mine. When Margaret called with the news, I thanked her for everything she had done. You earned this victory, she said. I smiled. No, Evelyn earned it years ago when she planned ahead. Life slowly became peaceful again. The constant phone calls stopped. The legal letters disappeared. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. A few weeks later, I listed 3 of the 7 beach houses for sale. Not because I needed the money, because Evelyn and I had always planned to reinvest in the marina one day. Within 2 months, all 3 properties sold. The proceeds allowed Harbor Point Marina to grow beyond anything we had imagined. We built a second repair workshop, added new covered boat storage, modernized every dock, created jobs for local families. Every improvement reminded me of Evelyn. She had always believed money should build something meaningful, not simply sit in a bank account. Laura called one Sunday afternoon. Dad, do you have a minute? Always. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I filed for divorce. I closed my eyes, not because I was celebrating, because I knew how difficult that decision must have been. Are you okay? Not yet, but I will be. She told me she had moved into a smaller apartment and reopened her interior design business. For the first time in years, she sounded hopeful. Would you like to visit the marina sometime? I asked. She laughed softly. I'd like that. A week later, she came by. We spent the afternoon walking along the docks, talking about ordinary things. No lawyers, no courtrooms, no arguments. Just a father and daughter slowly rebuilding what had almost been lost. Sometimes healing doesn't happen in one conversation. Sometimes it begins with simply showing up. As for Ryan, I heard he quietly left the city a few months later. His real estate business never fully recovered. Several investors walked away. Former business partners distanced themselves. Whether the authorities would eventually uncover everything hidden inside those financial records, I honestly didn't know. And after everything that had happened, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had protected my family, protected Evelyn's wishes, and protected everything we had spent a lifetime building. That was enough. Late one autumn afternoon, I finally launched a sailboat I had spent months restoring. Ben untied the ropes while Laura stood on the dock smiling. As the boat drifted into open water, the breeze filled the sails. The marina slowly disappeared behind me. I switched off the engine and let the boat glide quietly across the bay. The water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time in a very long while, I felt completely at peace. I looked toward the horizon and whispered, "We did it, Evelyn." The wind carried my words across the water, and somehow I felt she had heard them, because true wealth was never measured by beach houses, or bank accounts, or court victories. It was measured by the people you loved, the values you protected, and the legacy you refused to surrender. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, thank you for spending your time with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What lesson did you take away from Harold's journey? And if you enjoy powerful family drama stories like this one, consider following the channel so you won't miss the next unforgettable story.